What would you do if you found out that your art was being used to torture people? For most of us, that's just a thought experiment and a pretty chilling one at that, but for one band, it became a shocking reality. Their music, harsh, experimental, and designed to make you uncomfortable, was allegedly being blasted for hours on end to break prisoners at Guantanamo Bay. For the Canadian industrial pioneer Skinny Puppy, the answer wasn't just to protest or to write an angry song, it was to send the United States government a bill for their services. Now, to really get this story, you first have to understand Skinny Puppy themselves. Formed back in 1982, they were never really meant for the pop charts. It all started with a guy named Kevin Key, who was getting seriously bored with the polished new wave sound for his band at the time. He wanted to create something raw, something that looked at the world through a darker and more distorted lens. He soon found his other half in the enigmatic vocalist Nevik Ogre, and together they cooked up a sound that would help define a new genre, industrial music. Now, industrial music, which kicked off in the UK in the mid-70s, was basically this rebellion against punk rock. Its pioneers felt that to be truly revolutionary, music had to cut ties with tradition. They embraced noise, tape loops, synthesizers, and grinding mechanical rhythms. The point wasn't to write catchy tunes, it was to build sonic worlds that mirrored our own bleak post-industrial reality. It was music designed to be confrontational, unsettling, and to get underneath your skin. Skinny Puppy took that idea and cranked it to 11. They mashed up industrial, funk, noise, and electro using groundbreaking sampling techniques to create a sound that was all their own. Their lyrics and famously theatrical live shows dove headfirst into uncomfortable topics like vivisection, environmental collapse, and politics. With Ogre's distorted screams and Key's chaotic soundscapes, their music sounded like the perfect score for a dystopian nightmare. It was art meant to make you feel something. Even if that feeling was dread, they just never imagined who else would be listening. Now, the rumours started bubbling up in 2014 through what the band called a reliable grapevine. They began to hear whispers that their music was being used at the Guantanamo Bay detention camp. These stories describe their songs being weaponized as part of so-called enhanced interrogation techniques, and the confirmation came from a pretty unexpected source, a fan. A former Guantanamo Bay guard named Terry Holdbrooks reached out to the band directly. Holdbrooks had been a huge Skinny Puppy fan for a long time, and seeing the music he loved twisted into a tool of torture was a deeply personal, horrifying experience for him. He painted a grim picture. Detainees were allegedly handcuffed in stress positions inside cold rooms, while Skinny Puppy's music was blasted at deafening volumes for 6, sometimes 12 hours straight. The goal was simple: to disorient, to terrify, and to break a person's will. Holdbrooks said he saw prisoners soil themselves from the sheer stress. One former detainee, Rahal Ahmed, later described music torture to the press, saying, "You can't concentrate on anything. The music makes you completely disoriented. It takes over your brain, you lose control, and you start to hallucinate." In a case of dark irony, one of the songs on repeat was VX Gas Attack, a track about chemical warfare.
Bethlehem.
Skinny Puppy learned their music had been used on at least 4 different people in this scenario, so the art they had created to critique the system was now ironically being used as a weapon by the system. Understandably, the band was horrified. Kevin Key put it bluntly by saying, "I'm not only against the fact that they're using our music to inflict damage on somebody else, but they're doing it without anybody's permission. Nivek Ogre agreed with his bandmate by saying we never supported those types of scenarios. But there was also this grim sense of inevitability. We thought this would end up happening in a weird way, Key admitted in an interview. Because we make unsettling music, we can see it being used in a weird way, but it doesn't sit right with us. The very thing that made their music powerful, its harshness, its ability to make you feel uneasy, were the same things that were being made to evoke this effective psychological weapon. This twisted revelation actually became the direct inspiration for their next album, which they appropriately titled Weapon. Ogre even joked they considered taking the idea to its darkest, most sarcastic conclusion, releasing the album with an instruction manual on how to use it for torture, and even asking the government which frequencies were the most effective. But dark humour wasn't enough. They felt a real line had been crossed, not just morally, but ethically and legally. This was their intellectual property, used without their permission for something they found truly disgusting. They knew they had to do more than just release a statement, so they came up with a plan. At first, the idea was to make the cover of their new album, Weapon, an invoice made out to the US government, a piece of protest art, but the more they talked about it, and after getting some legal coaching, the symbolic gesture started to become something very, very real. Skinny Puppy decided to bill the US Department of Defense for musical services rendered. The price tag they chose was as symbolic as the art itself, $660,000 US, and it was a brilliant move. Part political theatre, part legitimate grievance. The number was a clear nod to the hellish nature of the situation. It was designed to get headlines and mock the absolute absurdity of it all, while also making a serious point about intellectual property and human rights. In early 2014, the band announced they were sending the invoice to the Pentagon. He told CTV News, "We sent them an invoice for our musical services considering they'd gone ahead and used our music without our knowledge and used it as an actual weapon against somebody." They made it clear this wasn't about money, it was about taking a stand. They even considered a lawsuit if the invoice was ignored. And this is where the story went viral. News outlets everywhere picked up the sheer audacity of it, but from the US government, absolute crickets. A military spokesperson claimed the Department of Defense never received an invoice and insisted that they were committed to treating detainees humanely, a statement that flew in the face of the reports that were coming out from Guantanamo Bay. So the $660,000 bill was never paid. The lawsuit never happened, the government just ignored them. But Skinny Puppy's stunt still had a huge impact. It dragged the conversation about using music in psychological warfare back into the spotlight, and they were far from the only ones. The list of artists whose music was reportedly used at Guantanamo is long and frankly bizarre. We're talking Metallica, Rage Against the Machine, Eminem, Queen, David Gray, and even the theme songs from Barney the Dinosaur and Sesame Street, which is a new form of torture if you ask me. Other artists had different reactions. Rage Against the Machine and Pearl Jam joined protest coalitions. David Gray said he was shocked by the lack of public outcry, but no other artist fought back with the same perfect blend of legal threat and punk rock performance as Skinny Puppy did. Skinny Puppy's invoice was so much more than a bill. It was a performance, a protest, and a powerful statement. They were faced with a horrific situation, their art being twisted into a tool for suffering, and they completely flipped the script. They used the government's own language of bureaucracy and capitalism to expose the moral bankruptcy of it all. The Pentagon never cut the check for the $660,000, but the band's defiant act gave us something far, far more valuable. It created a story so wild it just has to be true. The time a band sent a bill from hell to its most powerful and most disturbing client.